Why Walter liked this opening so much. The rocks are shaped in strong sculptural ways with line and graded washes, and some brown and bluish color. Showing only the upper parts of the servants is a play on another old convention, by which the principal figures were revealed completely and lesser ones partly hidden. Next. The comically low-class faces of the servants, with their doleful expressions, are another of the painting's charms. There's some interior drawing on the rocks along with the washes. Nothing done by Chen Hongshou is merely routine or conventional. Next, please. The setting of the forest, with its grotesquely twisted and knotty old trees, bunches of flowers, and rows of bright blue grasses on the ground. Also the beginning of the bamboo grove, seen between the trees in middle distance. Playful archaism in figures is one thing, and understandable, but playful archaism in landscape elements is quite another, and hard to understand, how he did it, that is. Nothing could be more different, from the earnest imitations of old landscape styles, the type called Fang, that was practiced at this time by Dongqi Chang and his literati followers. The varied coloring of the trees is part of the highly formal, artificial, but elusive air of the whole picture. Even the mist changes color from white to pale red-brown and back to white as it drifts through the bamboo. The grotesque forms and surfaces of the trees somehow recall the exposed bone and muscle structures of organic things that have grown old and emaciated. I could go on endlessly trying to articulate some of the multi-layered elusiveness of this painting. Next, please. Rolling on, we see the first two of the seven sages. One of them, sitting on a rock and turning to look leftward, one hand on his knee, holds a musical instrument, mostly hidden, but probably the yuan, a lute-like plucked instrument. Next. The same figure is seen closer. Even within this exaggeratedly antique style of drawing, Chen Hongshou manages to suggest solid bodies beneath the heavy robes, a feature more of his own time than of true antiquity, when they mostly would have been bodiless, with the robes occupying space, but without any sense of real bodies beneath them. There are exceptions, but mostly that was true. Next. The next section, revealing the first three of the seven sages and the stone table in the clearing around which they have gathered. The second sage, his back to us, holds a fan in one hand and a wine cup in the other. Their clothing is loosened, and they sit in what is meant to be relaxed postures, expressive of their untrammeled ease, their escape from the constraints of society. A big green wine pot with the handle of a ladle protruding from its mouth is on the table before them. Next. The third of the seven sages lies comfortably on the stone table, his back resting against a raised section of natural stone placed for that purpose at one end. One arm and one leg are draped over a long staff, the other leg turned upward with the foot showing, the other arm with hands stretched out, pressed against the stone table, bearing some of his weight. His red sandals are placed on the ground before him. His long hair spills over his shoulders. Notice, by the way, the bamboo stalks above his head and to the left. Do they look odd, curiously lacking in variety and interest? We will see why in a moment. But let me insert here, next. Early in the chapter on Chen Hongshou in my compelling image book, I reproduced these two pictures together. The lower one is, of course, one of the seven sages from the 5th century tomb near Nanjing. The upper image is a self-portrait that Chen Hongshou painted as one leaf in an album fairly early in his career, in 1627, with a long inscription that I partly translate there. The sprawled, archaistic figure, with its real sense of an articulated body beneath the clothing, unlike so many other human figures in the Sixth Dynasty's painting and pictorial design, as I said, is a type that Chen Hongshou seems to have known about, not from these tomb murals, which he couldn't have seen, but from some other source. The oddly bent, reclining figure of Chen's third sage follows this type, with more of the body exposed. Next, we'll go back to that. The next section of the scroll reveals the fourth and fifth of the seven sages. But before I speak of them, let me talk of the rows of stiffly upright bamboo stalks above them in the distance, continuing the ones we saw above the third sage. How could Chen Hongshou's unfailing ability to make diverting to variety, even within repetitive passages, have failed him so badly here? Next. The answer is it didn't. That's not the hand of Chen Hongshou at work up there, but the hand of Walter Hochstetter, along with the hand of his Hong Kong mounter probably. Walter, as I related before, had the very bad habit of altering paintings to change or remove places he didn't like. He always claimed that he was really restoring the painting to its original form, taking out a place that had been added, but that wasn't true in many cases, or most cases. And in this case, as he told me on showing me the painting, he disliked the mist that originally wound its way through this middle-distance bamboo grove, as you can see in the photograph, and simply removed it, or not so simply, rather laboriously, and replaced it with what seems to me at least, dull, repetitive series of bamboo stalks. When Elizabeth Hammer of Christie's wrote to tell me that they were putting this scroll into auction, I immediately wrote back to her to inform her of this change and to recommend that she get access to the original photos of it that I had received from Walter and were still in the department files, and reproduce those in the catalog also. To her great credit, she did this, taking a lot of trouble to find, with some help from Pat Berger, the mounted photos in our old photo archive in Dole Library, no longer in use and stored in an obscure place. My point is that the purchaser of the scroll should know about this alteration and be able to make the decision whether to attempt to restore it to its original form, but that would be difficult and probably unwise. Anyway, she did find and copy the old photos and reproduce this one in her catalog. I now have the photos myself, and I preserve them for future Chen Hongshou scholars as important documents. I don't like this alteration of Walter's, but I don't think that it changes or hurts this wonderful scroll enough to make it any less worth owning. I insert that for any possible buyer. Next, please. Returning to look at the fourth of the seven sages, he sits on the ground, turned back toward the others, flowers in his hair, holding what appears to be a wine ladle, and leaning back against a bundle of scrolls, of which only the ends are seen. Under him is a kind of animal skin, of which only the protruding edges can be seen. A flowing stream has appeared behind him, separating him from the bamboo grove. If we were to look back, we would see it as a pale blue strip behind the first three sages, unnoticed before. Next. The flowing water takes on more prominence as we roll further. Another tall tree appears, and behind it we glimpse the fifth sage. But before we turn to him, let's gaze once more at the dull, repetitive grove of bamboo stalks up above, which Walter somehow preferred to Chen Hongshou's original, more interesting image of the bamboo grove with mist drifting through it. Curse you, Walter, for doing this. Next, please. But enough of that. The section of the scroll that follows introduces more foreground trees, as interestingly bizarre as the one seen earlier in the scroll. Two of these, the closest ones, have elaborately imagined root structures. The fifth and sixth of the seven sages are mostly hidden behind these trees, with only their upper faces and parts of their bodies seen around them. The fifth sage simply sits leaning forward, listening intently to the music played by the others, which, as always in such scenes, we have to imagine as blending in a way that they felt or knew to be cosmically significant in a Taoist way, blending with the natural sounds of the running stream, the wind in the trees. Next. The sixth sage is playing a Chen, or zither, his right hand touching the strings, his left hand resting on his right wrist. Next. Moving on to the next section, we have seen six sages and are, of course, anticipating the seventh. But Chen Hongshou makes us wait for a while he shows us more trees, nearer and further, more odd flowering plants growing from the ground. At the top, our gaze is drawn back more and more into depth, with masses of foliage hanging and trees and bamboo stalks growing up at further and further distance. Next. The trees close up. As I was saying before, Chen Hongshou's highly idiosyncratic way of treating plant and animal forms, so that the plant seemed capable of animation almost, with musculature and bones, as if, imparts a strange ambiguity to our visual responses to these images. We lean toward misreading them, then correct ourselves, and the back and forth gives depth to the experience. Next. The arrival of the seventh sage is put off still longer, as quieter spaces follow the busy ones. The stream broadens. A few of the bamboo stalks move into the middle ground and are seen complete, with their twigs and leaves spread out in large, flat patterns. Next. And the thatched top of a tingzi, or kiosk, protrudes from the lower margin of the scroll, implying a complete structure, complete building down below, unseen. What appears to be rose vines in bloom wind around its top, with tiny spiraling tendrils that hold our attention for a moment, before it is abruptly shifted to, next please, the seventh sage, seen at last. But he appears not to be moving confidently forward to join the others. He stands alone, his cloak drooping around him, a would-be seventh sage uncertain about how he will be received by the others. And he's depicted in a way quite different from the unambiguous archaism of the others. As an image, and especially his face, has a strange air of contemporary presence, and a strange sense of someone who doesn't quite know what he is doing there, and feels awkward about it. Next. So who is he really? A question for which the right answer cannot be simple and cannot be stated quickly. My belief, expressed in my treatment of this painting in my compelling image book, is that he probably represents on some level the person for whom Chen Hongshou painted the scroll, identified in his inscription as Taoist Chen. We are confronted here, that is, with another double image, like Chen Hongshou's self-portrait or his picture of his aunt, in which the portrayal of a real living person is superimposed on or merged with the conventional image of an ideal figure from antiquity. Next, please. The last section, with Chen Hongshou's brief inscription, a dedication reading, "Old Lotus," that's Chen's name for himself, "for Taoist Chen has imitated the Tang masters," end quote. Meaning painters of antiquity, he was not really specifying Tang as distinct from pre-Tang. While we gaze longer at this unexpected and profoundly puzzling and moving ending to what presents itself as a painting of the seven sages of the bamboo grove, let me read what I wrote about it in my compelling image book. 4 of the sages form a group in the central section. As we roll further, we find 2 more partly hidden behind trees.